listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I am Bob Schlehuber.
And my name is Jamarl Thomas. Let's get ready to go against the grain. So we have another exceptional show for you today. Early in the hour, we're going to start off with a major panic spooking Wall Street. The market plunged 2,000 points in the opening hours as a crude oil price war escalates to general fears around the worsening of the COVID-19 outbreak. Later in the show, leading into the second hour, we'll get into the politics on the home front with election news into what could be the 11th hour last stand for one Sanders, coming tomorrow on Super Tuesday. The entire weight of the Democratic apparatus is folded around one Joe Biden, so the question becomes, what is Sanders going to do and what needs to take place tomorrow? There's also the interesting question that needs to be asked, and that I've been asking, and I think some people here have been asking, that I think we're going to answer. What on earth is Elizabeth Warren doing? She's just had her SNL and her media run immediately after leaving the race. In the second hour, we'll also get into concerns being raised around Joe Biden's declining cognitive function and the narrative being used to fend off those questions. In addition to high-profile, high-octane endorsements for one Bernie Sanders, the question around that, is it too little, too late, or just in the nick of time? Also, you don't want to miss our weekly segment, Mr. Press, where we lambaste incompetence, malfeasance is just plain poor behavior by the Sunday news bubble. But first, we got to start here. Super Tuesday is upon us. Again, Super Tuesday is upon us again. Tomorrow, 6 states are going to go to the polls to pick their pony between one Joe Biden and one Bernie Sanders. In the same way, or in a similar position, we can say Sanders is in a similar position as what Joe Biden was going into South Carolina. It goes without saying that he has to have a strong showing. Now, the campaign, fortunately, finally, thankfully, seems to be understanding the urgency of this particular moment, and they've started sharpening their attacks on Joe Biden, everything from Social Security to trade deals to LGBTQ rights to war policy. They're throwing everything against the wall to see what sticks. Now, for a campaign that ran almost singularly around this notion of policy, thank you. This is something that the people who are backing him wants. And if we're being just brutally honest, it's one of those things that is necessary in order to gain and regain that particular momentum. Oftentimes, politics seems like a fight for things that often go beyond this notion of policy. Whether you're talking about the bathroom issues, especially on issues of war and foreign policy, it seems like a lot of the fights is just to get to determine who's going to make the choice, not on the issues of policy in and of itself. Which is why I don't necessarily hit Sanders for the policy thing. I think that's something that's beneficial and necessary, especially if your policies are that much more prized. You fight on the terrain to which you're most comfortable with, and for Sanders, that's policy. However, policy is not the end-all, be-all in regards to what wins various conversations. And a candidate, especially Sanders, need to be able to get beyond himself in order to make that case. And fortunately, hopefully, thankfully, if it would keep going, he would continue to do so. The catch is, and what Sanders, I think, had to understand was that there are things that matter more than your own specific biases and ideologies, especially in the context of us. We are on a ball hurling through space at fantastic speeds. That ball is real. I, as a person, am real. Cash, not so much. And even the political ideologies, not so much. There are things that sometimes matter more. Fact of the matter is the person that's going to be running against Sanders, who the Democratic Party has, for the most part, coalesced behind, and everybody is also throwing their endorsements in for, is one Joe Biden, the same Joe Biden that on the debate stage made this comment about blacks and record players.
The teachers are I'm married to a teacher. My deceased wife is a teacher. They have every problem coming to them. We have to make sure that every single child does, in fact, have 3, 4, and 5-year-olds go to school, not daycare, school. We bring social workers into homes with parents to help them deal with how to raise their children. It's not that they don't want to help. They don't know quite what to do. Play the radio. Make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night, the phone. Make sure the kids hear words. A kid coming from a very poor school, or a very poor background, will hear 4 million words fewer spoken by the time they get there.
Was he reaching for phonograph? He was going to say phonograph.
He might have said phonograph. Yeah, I mean, but that's the guy that all of these other Democrats, Schumer, Pelosi, Reid, Obama, all of these people have lined up saying, that's the guy that we want on that debate stage with Donald Trump. It's as if the Democratic Party has just accepted they're going to lose this particular round, but what's more important is to stop Sanders. So yes, they're going to coalesce around a man who gets on stage saying something like that doesn't have the political acumen to know that in a party that has a large influx of African Americans in regards to the party, that you don't make this point that they don't know how to raise their kids. That's a little dicey. But beyond that, incoherent. And they're going to expect Joe Biden to go stage to stage to stage going after Donald Trump. Go beyond that for a moment. Even beyond this notion of stage to stage going against Donald Trump. Just the very basic notion that if you believe that a Green New Deal, that climate change is an existential threat, if you believe that healthcare, these calamities, 500,000 people going bankrupt each year, if you believe that Social Security needs to be expanded, not cut, I can go down the line, criminal justice, marijuana, if you believe all these things, then it is a concern in real world materialistic terms that this guy who seems to be sundowning, who they are now hiding, who didn't know Obama's name at some point, didn't know where he was at a certain point, is the person that the establishment is joining together to say, this is our guy. Now, the reality of it is Joe Biden is the weakest of the candidates to run up against Donald Trump, which again goes back to this notion of your own, this notion of what's real. Now, the reason why I say that is, ultimately, we're in a race where you have the moderates that have coalesced. You have Sanders, who's representing the left, and you have Warren, who is doing a press tour. And the operative question that we're going to get to eventually is, what is Warren doing? Let's take a listen to this clip where Warren is going after Joe Biden immediately after South Carolina primary.
I respect his many years of service. But no matter how many Washington insiders tell you to support him, nominating fellow Washington insider will not meet this moment. Nominating a man who says we do not need any fundamental change in this country will not meet this moment. And nominating someone who wants to restore the world before Donald Trump, when the status quo has been leaving more and more people behind for decades, is a big risk for our party and for our country.
I agree with her. It is a big risk for our party and our country, which gets to a very weird and strange question. There are three people in this race, one Bernie Sanders, one Joe Biden, and one Tulsi Gabbard. Elizabeth Warren has gotten out of the race and has done her press tours and whatnot. But that leads a weird, strange question. Warren was in this race calling for big structural change. She was in this race calling for Medicare for all. She kept saying, I'm for Medicare for all. Even recently when she got angry that people were going after her plan, she kept saying that she wanted to do something about the military budget, even putting that to be part of her Medicare for all plan, the expansion of Social Security, the prison population. All of these things were aspects of her policy. She went through one policy position after the next, pretending to be Bernie Sanders. And she gets out the race. Have those pressing real-world concerns changed? Are you going to make the argument to me that Warren was for all of these things when she was running, but the moment she got out the race, she was angered by these snake emojis, and so she couldn't necessarily get behind the guy who's also representing those things? Is that what we're trying to understand it? My point is, if Bernie Sanders can put aside his ideological framing of the world to make choices and actions that maybe he's uncomfortable with, but at the very least he understands that there are real-world materialistic concerns for the people in this country, either people who are ill, people who are working jobs where they're not getting paid a decent wage, or people who fundamentally want structural change in the context of this country. The moderates were very clear in regards to what they wanted, and all of them got out and backed their guy. What is Warren doing? Does she want Sanders people to beg her to give her a backing to a candidate who she ran the race as if these two were on the same side? Is she angry that the people went after her and didn't necessarily back her with the same hilt as Sanders? What is her issue? And if indeed she did believe in those things, if indeed she did want that big structural change, then why on earth is she not backing Sanders? Why has it taken so long? Why has she gone around continuing to attack Sanders out of the race? And if the two people that you have in that race is Biden and Sanders, and Warren, as you just heard, considered Biden to be an unacceptable choice, then what is Warren doing? The key point that I'm trying to make here is there are real things that go beyond the political space. There are tragedies and horrors that people have to deal with in pursuing their particular life. And in the same way Sanders had to get over himself and back up a proposal or a way of going about things that goes beyond his typical wanting to talk about politics, I think this is one of those cases where the same has to be asked about Warren. If indeed real things matter, if indeed you want big structural change, if indeed you want Medicare for all, if indeed you want all of these issues that you went for the past year screaming that you were on board for and that you were pushing for, and you and Sanders was on the same side, then how weird does it look that you're not backing that guy? I've asked this more than one occasion, what is Elizabeth Warren doing? And I think we're going to get to that particular topic a little bit later today, but let's start the monologue there. I don't understand, and that's not true. Under my model of the world accepted that she was working in the context of the party, but a lot of people don't have that model. And a lot of people are shocked. I've seen a lot of angry people who are lefties who was backing Warren early on who are now angry at her because they don't understand the dynamics of the race and her who has said she was a lefty, not backing their guy. Bob, what do you think? So I am more cynical on this. I've said this on more than one occasion. And I think the last time you and I were talking about it, the catch becomes, does Warren endorse? And my thing is, well, if I'm right, and she's indeed a creature of the party, then the whole point was to split the vote up into the point of Super Tuesday, at which point it makes Sanders in a difficult spot. Let's say it that way. But by the same token, you can also make the argument she's just angry that she was doing well and then fell out the race. But my issue with this is, if indeed that's true, and if indeed she really believed the things that she was pushing for during the course of the campaign, it is really bizarre that there is one guy in the race that backs up the policies that you say you are for, but you are not backing that guy.
202-521-1320. And I'll get to my thoughts on Elizabeth Warren a little bit later in the show with her appearance there on Saturday Night Live. It's completely frustrating and disheartening to see that she was busy making jokes and going on skit shows this weekend as opposed to out on the stump speech for the policies she cares about. And you have a megaphone. Talk about the policies you care about. If you don't want to endorse Sanders, don't endorse Sanders, then simply go out and say, hey, we need Medicare for all. I don't know who the nominee is going to be. I don't want to endorse anybody, but let me remind you again of my policies and stick to those policies. At least do that.
Yeah.
But the fact you're going on Rachel Maddow and the fact you're going on Saturday Night Live joking around shows a complete lack of seriousness. And if it's just being petty, then cool, more pettiness in politics. That's really going to reignite all of those Americans that didn't turn out and vote last time around. That's really going to turn out all of those young people that you've been standing by the last year running this election for. That's what's really going to, you going on Saturday Night Live is really going to help these people continue to stay engaged in politics. I really want to focus first, though, on the first part of this conversation around Joe Biden's electability.
Yes.
And the idea that he is the candidate you think you can beat Donald Trump with. And we've talked a lot about how bizarre it is in a world that Donald Trump is somehow going to outflank Joe Biden to his left on some things. And then obviously on the just kind of crazed right-wing white supremacist, anti-immigration stuff, he'll still be to Biden's right on plenty of things. So don't mix up what I'm saying right now about how I'm not saying Trump is to Biden's left, but on issues like foreign policy, he's going to be able to tack to the left, right? If somehow the Afghanistan deal doesn't completely collapse and they're able to remove some U.S. troops, Donald Trump's going to be able to say, look, I got those troops out. Sure, Joe Biden, you voted against Afghanistan, but I actually got the troops out. What did you do with Obama in your administration? You kept them in there, and you voted for the Iraq War. And Donald Trump, somebody that obviously would have voted for the Iraq War if given a vote on it, he can say, I didn't vote on the thing. So there's two major U.S. foreign policy blunders that Donald Trump's going to be able to tack to the left. And then on social justice issues, he's basically just going to mess with Joe Biden. Donald Trump does not care about black people.
Yeah.
But yet he has policies, and they've done enough tiny little things in a very skewed right-wing authoritarian perspective on criminal justice in America that even getting a few people out of prison through the Second Chance Act and some of these clemencies that he's been able to get people in jail, that's going to play up against super predator that's going to play up against crime bill that's going to play up against all of that stuff, and that's tacking to the left. And then even this thing now that Trump has seized on this opportunity to basically hit Biden on these past comments around Social Security and healthcare and all those things.
I told you. Yeah.
So again, Trump's going to tack to the left, and it's just kind of funny seeing the Twitterverse and the Ryan Liz's and others of the world basically saying, like, how dare Bernie Sanders use the same attacks that Donald Trump's using? But yet again, Donald Trump's been able to tack himself to the left, and Sanders is also to the left of Joe Biden on a very, like, archaic political left-right scale. And so that's some, like, cabal they're basically saying. It's like Sanders and Trump people are working together against Biden. Like, what in the world? You're missing what's happening right now. People are frustrated with the overall system. They're frustrated with the Democratic establishment lining up behind Biden. They were frustrated after 8 years of the hope and change of Barack Obama. Material conditions didn't change whatsoever. And to not understand that there's a loud voice of anger against the Democratic establishment party. It's not some mysterious cabal of Trump people working with Sanders people. It's not a good place for the Democratic Party to be right now. And they think that collectively they can win, as if the individual at the top doesn't matter, I guess is what they're saying, is like, no, we'll at our own levels and our own parties, we'll organize, and Biden will just be a name on a ticket. Well, that's not how the news media works. That's not how the cameras work. They're going to be focused in on this guy. He has to do pressers every day. He's going to have to do rallies every day. He's going to have to turn out tons of people every day. That spotlight's going to be on this guy. There's no hiding this.
None.
They've hidden it long enough with Sanders in the race because the number one goal was to get Sanders out.
Right.
But once that's done and it's just Biden, Trump, you can't get around it. Where else do you go?
Yeah, you're stuck with that. I mean, it, like you said, the crime bill, they're going to hit him on this notion of wars. They're going to hit him on the Trans-Pacific Partnership or NAFTA. He's going to get hit on all of these issues. And like I said, Biden is one of the weakest people to put up because of it, meaning even the Hunter Biden stuff, just rank corruption. That's going to be an issue. Meaning you can't even use that. You can't even call the guy corrupt because Hunter Biden comes in.
Real good plan there, Nancy Pelosi, to impeach Donald Trump using the names of the Biden family. That one's going to come back. It's not going to play well in the long run. Good for you. We have a caller on the line here. Tony, you wanted to get in on good old Joe Biden. What's on your mind today?
I've been watching the clip. Bob, been following you since by any means necessary. Happy to see your new show.
Thank you.
Big fan. Been following the latest stuff on the cognitive troubles and the record players and the Super Thursday and everything else that's been happening every time he speaks in public. And I know we've been talking about Donald Trump being kind of a moron and not being able to, like, having certain kinds of communication difficulties as well, but side-by-side comparison, man, it's kind of no question. Joe Biden makes Donald Trump look like Barack Obama when it comes to, like, public speaking ability, and that's a scary thing for me because I know that stress makes people with cognitive issues stronger. It makes it harder for them to form sentences, like the difficulty I have right now forming sentences. But I just wonder about if it's gonna be a real problem for him, even if he wins the presidency. Like, I just don't like where this is going at all.
Yeah, Tony, I completely hear you. I'm also somebody that in the pressure of the moments, the lights, the energy, people yelling at you, you get flustered. And we've seen that with Joe Biden poking people on the campaign trail. When confronted with somebody that disagrees with them, he either pokes them, challenges them to a push-up contest, or just simply tells them to go vote for the other guy. That's not a good strategy. Poking doesn't win you elections, Jamarl.
That typically, no. I mean, or what do you call the guy? Fat? He told, yeah. I mean, some of the stuff was amazing.
Horse-faced liar. Like, that's your
what it was.
response to
Horse-faced liar. I remember that.
And you're right. Donald Trump is a bully. He's a really good, effective bully that's going to pick on you, mess with you. He has no care about lying and quality. He's going to point out Joe Biden's awkward headbutting, sniffing, whatever the thing is that Joe Biden does. When this guy, Donald Trump, has done way worse.
It's going to be fair
game.
game.
Way worse.
Yes.
Do you think Donald Trump cares about what Donald Trump did? No, he's going to attack Joe Biden. Then Joe Biden's going to come back and say, well, you did this, and then it's going to go back and forth. That wins for Donald Trump. That doesn't win for Joe Biden. That doesn't win for Democrats. It doesn't win for people in suburbs. They're just going to see two old men fighting each other. The right and Republicans, they love that. They feed off of that. That's not where Joe Biden and the Democratic Party wants to be, and they're going to find themselves there really quickly.
Do you think they've just accepted that he's going to take an L? I mean, like, because it seemed to me that the biggest thing was this. Honestly, if you look at Joe Biden's press conferences or his debates back in, let's say, 2008, different person. I mean, they literally look like two different people in regards to his ability to talk, form sentences, hold arguments. I mean, and he used to have some degree of political acumen where you wouldn't get on stage and say black folks can't raise their kids.
Yeah.
Like, so it just seems absent. I mean, he just looks like an empty
I
vessel
don't know
of
if they're going to
sorts.
take the. I think their hope is Hillary Clinton was super hated, that if it's anybody but Hillary, we can win.
Yeah.
And then let's cross our fingers that the stock market and the economy continues to decline enough that we can make an argument against whatever Donald Trump says on the economy. And speaking of the economy, Jamarl, we have a great segment. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll be joined by Vijay Prashad after this break to talk about the disruptions to the markets around the world, both to the coronavirus and this latest oil pricing spat between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Let's take a quick break here on Political Misfits. We're live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Now, where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. Oh, and wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas, and we're talking about oil and viruses, my peoples. This is just getting started. On Monday, crude oil prices fell more than 20% in the largest one-day price crash in nearly 30 years since the 1991 Gulf War. Brent crude and international crude oil benchmark dropped from $45 a barrel to as low as $31. And there are predictions that it could fall as low as $20 a barrel. Stock trading in the U.S. was actually halted this morning after the Dow Jones Industrial Average tanked more than 1,800 points immediately upon the market opening, and the S&P 500 plunged 7%. The massive sell-off triggered a key market circuit breaker, and trading was halted for 15 minutes until 9:49 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The New York Stock Exchange has 3 levels of triggers that halt trading, or if the decline is severe enough, stop it for the rest of the day. Today's plunge triggered the first of those circuit breakers. We're joined to talk more about this by Vijay Prashad. Vijay is a historian, journalist, and executive director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Vijay, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks.
So there seems a lot to be involved in this oil price collapse. There's the fallout from cheap shale oil and gas produced from fracking in the U.S., plus the implosion of an agreement between Russia and Saudi Arabia on oil production. Tell us a little bit more about what's going on in the oil markets and this tension between Russia and Saudi Arabia.
Well, it's a perfect storm, really. But each of these elements, the oil, the markets, and coronavirus, are also slightly separate. The oil issue is, I think, quite significant. For the last 5 or 6 years, OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, has expanded to something called OPEC Plus, which includes Russia, and that's the plus. Saudi Arabia and Russia, being 2 large oil producers, have had to come to an agreement over the course of these last bunch of years on how much oil should they bring out from the ground, and therefore what kind of oil prices can each of the countries and the other members of OPEC Plus sustain. There was a kind of provisional agreement over the last couple of years. In 2016, Saudi Arabia went alone, started pumping a lot of oil out of the ground. At that point, the enemy was shale, and Saudi Arabia, in some ways, by dropping the price of oil, was able to hurt the shale oil producers. Of course, it also deeply and adversely impacted Saudi Arabia's own finances. This time, on Friday in Vienna, Russia and Saudi Arabia couldn't agree on volumes of oil to be brought out from under the ground, and therefore there was a sort of go-it-alone attitude. Saudi Arabia immediately announced that they're going to increase pumping from their reserves, and this, of course, led to a part of the reason why the oil prices plummeted so sharply.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable there in Saudi Arabia. Several princes have also been arrested over the weekend as they respond both to oil shakeups as well as the coronavirus, but quite a bit there in Saudi Arabia taking place over the weekend.
So, got a question for you. I'm fascinated by this notion of a trade war in regards to Russia and Saudi Arabia with the oil reserves. Now, Russia didn't want to cut their usage, correct? I mean, ultimately, Saudi Arabia is putting this, increasing production and cutting the price in order to attack them monetarily in the standpoint of the cost of oil. Am I understanding that right?
Well, there's a problem for countries like Saudi Arabia, also Russia. If you take the sanctions out, of course, Iran, Venezuela, you take Nigeria, any country that's reliant upon revenues from oil faces a serious problem. Because, of course, if oil prices decline, their revenues are going to decline. Therefore, they go into a kind of budgetary crisis. So nobody really wants to cut volume when oil prices are low. You see, when oil prices are near 100 or above $100 a barrel, then you can have a serious discussion about moderating the volume of oil you put on the market. If oil prices are down to $30 a barrel, perhaps $21 a barrel, then you need to have volume to offset the collapse of the prices. And that actually, this decline of oil prices over the last 5-6 years has in fact created a lot of hostility inside OPEC+. Nobody is willing, in a sense, to stem the volume to raise the oil prices. It's kind of anarchy there. They're not able to cooperate with each other. For some, it's argued that it's for political reasons. Others argue this is just, go it alone. I mean, I care about only myself. And in that regard, you're actually hurting yourself in the end. But this is the perfect storm because there's also the price-in problem. In other words, there's a worry that because of the coronavirus, because of the lack of air travel, because people are not going out, because there is a fear that in a month or two there'll be much greater shutdowns of basic operations, there's a sense that oil usage is going to decline. So there's also the other side, which is not only the supply side, the debate between Russia, Saudi Arabia, etc., but also the demand side. Will use of oil decline? And part of the pressure now on oil prices is not just the supply side question with OPEC+, but also the demand side question, whether people will indeed be using less gasoline, will they be using less jet fuel and so on, because they fears self-quarantining or official quarantine because of the coronavirus. So both things from the demand and supply side struck at the same time. I mean, in that sense, frankly, that's the reason why I feel this Vienna meeting was very irresponsible, that the country should have come to an agreement, at least on the supply side, because they know it was already very clear that on the demand side, there were going to be serious challenges.
Yeah, I'm also always curious here, Vijay, the ramifications of these big dips in the market and who can possibly withstand a plunge and who is going to be ultimately the losers. I obviously go back to 2008 and these big banks all can be bailed out and they can be saved at the end of the day. Pension rates, seniors, younger people in the economy just wiped out for a decade plus after that, losing their homes. And so now it seems like at least Russia seems to some degree be diversified. The United States obviously can take a big hit like this. And as much as the big banks and other people on Wall Street are panicked over these huge drops here, which they are, a lot of them will be able to rebound once hopefully the virus here, the COVID-19 is somewhat tackled and under control. Eventually you assume Saudi Arabia has enough oil to last it for a long time that they can rebound. But what about some of these smaller countries that rely heavily on oil prices? Or what about the everyday people who are seeing lifetimes of savings being rapidly wiped away? I think that's kind of the failure from the 2008 stock market crash and the financial crisis, housing crisis, whichever you want to call it, was that we didn't actually rebuild the economy in a way to actually be able to resist some of these big downfalls. And instead, you leave the same people vulnerable in the past are the same ones that are going to be vulnerable this time around as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm very glad you brought up the 2008 credit crisis. That was a credit crisis. That was a point where banks simply did not have the liquidity to deal with the collapse of, whatever toxic pieces of paper they were holding on to. And at that point, the government, because it basically favors companies over ordinary people, came in and provided enormous amount of liquidity to banks, through the TARP program, through the fiscal stimulus and so on. In this case, there's already enormous amounts of liquidity in the banks. The banks are flush with cash, which is why it was very strange that the Federal Reserve of the United States decided on an emergency rate cut last week. It made no sense. Why would you cut the rates when the banks are already flush with cash? You see, what you've got to look for, and this is, I think, very important, is that if oil prices continue to deteriorate, the oil companies, the big transnational oil giants, are going to have an enormous economic problem. And I have a great fear that the government is going to come in and say that you have to bail them out, you have to save jobs and so on. This time, this is not the auto industry bailout. This is not the bank bailout. This might be, and this is extraordinarily obscene, this might be an energy company bailout. You have to really watch out for this.
In a time of climate change and the environment destroying itself, we're going to bail out big oil and natural gas.
It's totally obscene. That's why I used that word. I mean, this is an opportunity. If you want to use a crisis as an opportunity, this is an opportunity to squeeze these companies and try to force some kind of transition. Look, I'm not one of those people that believes that capitalism cannot deal with the transition to renewable energy. It's perfectly capable of doing it. The problem is none of these private companies are willing to finance it. They'll only finance something like this if risk is taken off the table. In other words, the way capitalism functions is capitalists will invest in a new sector as long as the government takes the risk. And here's a good opportunity if these energy companies are in a crisis to force them to use their cash and whatever money the public sector puts on the table to force a transition through. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is this administration, the Trump administration, is essentially going to mobilize public money to underwrite and help private carbon-producing, energy companies.
Yeah, you see the same thing in Australia right now. You'd say, hey, with your entire land on fire here right now would be a chance to address some of these issues. And obviously, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has no interest in that whatsoever. Vijay, I did want to ask you a little bit about the impact of the coronavirus on the economy and just in society writ large. Many people's favorite member of Congress, Senator Ted Cruz, has gone into quarantine, and hopefully he'll stay there well beyond the 2 weeks that's recommended. Maybe he can just stay there for the next few years. I'm doubtful that he'll be there. I'm sure he'll be live streaming every moment of that quarantine, Jamarl. But it shows what I think is really kind of fascinating, just how interconnected our world is in many ways, and the fact that this could spread so rapidly because people themselves, our economies, all of these things are wrapped up. And so it's always so beyond understanding that we yet still work in a nation state model of like, this is my land, don't bother me whatsoever, when the whole world is showing how quickly and interconnected it is, and how we should be talking more about how countries can work together, think together, act together because of issues like this. And if you think about environmental crises in the future, that's going to have more and more mass migration around the world when people are displaced. We're already seeing it, obviously, in Syria and elsewhere where wars have displaced people. Now imagine climate change pushing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people across borders. This COVID-19 is tiny, tiny, tiny in the scale of what we are going to see in the future on the trajectory we're on. And yet we've failed to address and basically be able to quarantine and act as a global community or communities within here in the United States or in Italy or in Iran to actually prevent these things from spreading. It seems like if we can't handle this, we should be quite terrified of what's going to come in the future.
Oh, I quite agree with you. I mean, people need to understand that 90% of the vitamin C consumed in the United States comes from China. The global supply chain has made it impossible to actually quarantine a country from other countries. That's just not on the cards at all. What's remarkable with this particular episode is it's demonstrated two serious institutional failures. The first institutional failure is it's demonstrated that private healthcare is simply not up to the task. I mean, when you look at how the Chinese have reacted to COVID-19, it should actually, it should startle people in countries like the United States and in Italy, where they've really destroyed their public health systems. In China, they were able to mobilize social resources rapidly to deal with what is essentially a public emergency. But you cannot do that in the United States because you privatized healthcare. How are people supposed to stay home when they'll get fired from their jobs? There's no social net in these countries. That's the first institutional failure, that when you destroy social welfare, when you destroy a social net, when you don't have public health of a robust kind, you're going to be seriously adversely impacted by something like this. The second institutional failure is that because the United Nations has been basically treated as a doormat by the major countries of the World Health Organization is unable to be the leading force in tackling COVID-19. All the countries should take seriously these UN agencies. They need to better fund them, and they need to allow them to take leadership to deal with global health emergencies. That's what they've been built to do. But it's not there. I mean, there's not even been a serious United Nations discussion about a global response to COVID-19. And we're already several months into this particular, global catastrophe. I mean, there should have been some sort of empaneled discussion immediately. Nothing. That's the second major institutional failure. The first is what you might call neoliberalism, the gutting of social life. And the second one is the destruction of international institutions, almost deliberately, by underfunding them, particularly something like the World Health Organization.
So what does this look like in the United States? Meaning, if this continues to expand, right now this seems to be getting worse. And like you made the point before, we're ill prepared for it. Even just looking at the CDC and what Trump has been saying, all things being equal, this is not necessarily something we seem to have prepared all that much for. So what does it look like in the United States? Because I have to be honest, I don't see us shutting down a city the size of New York City with this particular virus getting worse and worse as it accelerates.
Well, you see, you have to really look at it. I mean, the Chinese shut down Shanghai, and they were able to do that because they basically said, we are going to put people before profit. And I think that's not possible in the United States. Who's going to underwrite that? I'm not sure that there's any capability of that. So that's one thing I think people need to consider. When you have whatever criticisms you have of China, certainly the way they handled this crisis is quite exemplary. And I think that lessons need to be learned from that. The question of how it's going to be dealt with, I think, is quite significant. I mean, there's no testing. There's a cavalier attitude towards it. There's a belief that once the so-called flu season ends, this virus is going to disappear. In Italy, they are saying that it might, in fact, have mutated and become much more, dangerous, more lethal. That's what people are saying. They haven't sequenced it in Italy, but that's what people are saying, that its mortality rate is higher. These things are very confusing, and there's no clarity. It creates a panic. People don't know how properly to react to it. And why is it a panic? I mean, you haven't a proper medical explanation from the U.S. government. You have somebody like Mike Pence who prays in order to get rid of COVID-19. That doesn't lift, the confidence of a public. You need to have much more medical information. You need to have, serious people talking about this very serious crisis. And that's simply not on offer.
Yeah, and it's quite scary. Even in Democratic-run cities, the health infrastructure is not up to par. I look at the city of Washington, D.C., which addresses its homeless population, those living with mental health illnesses or other diseases that they might have on the streets. They send more police their way. And the lack of the ability of the city to properly disseminate and build networks and supply chains that can get medicine out rapidly to those who are most vulnerable are not in place, and that's concerning. And to your point, Jamarl, one, it would have to even take the government to try to set up a quarantine. Can you imagine if people were quarantined by the government?
FEMA camps.
They would lose their minds.
Yeah.
They're not going to. And then there's why we had an article out talking basically about how the brutality of the Chinese quarantines and how they were basically locking people into buildings and stuff. You think if America actually puts into quarantine, there's not going to have to be some extreme measures to keep people in place? People are going to panic, and people are going to try to break through those quarantines, and they'll find their way around. This is kind of where it becomes quite controversial within the health field of whether or not to quarantine, because people are going to try to break past those quarantine areas anyways, and then you can't track people and their movements anymore. And so that's the two-sided things of it. VJ, I'm just kind of curious your thoughts. If Americans were quarantined, would Americans simply say, oh, okay, sure, for the betterment of all, we'll stay put?
No, I think this is an indisciplined population in comparison to the Chinese. I mean, let's face it, I don't think they had stormtroopers in Shanghai. I have friends who live in Shanghai. People just stayed home. It's an extremely, civic population in that sense. The civic culture is very strong. There was a student at a college in the United States who was either diagnosed with COVID, but I don't think so because there was no test. I think they told him to go home, and instead he went to a frat party and then went home. I mean, this level of lack of civic consciousness, I think, is very important for people to question. And you can't celebrate it. This is not something to celebrate. We're talking about concern for other people, and I'm not sure whether this is well developed enough. There needs to be a conversation. But let me just say one thing about this. It's not a question of individuals. Mr. Pence, I called him Spence. Mr. Pence held a meeting with cruise ship line executives. And at the meeting, they had a press conference where he basically said that cruise ship lines are going to have to develop a good policy for safety and health safety on the cruise ships. Now, actual policy, a reasonable approach which would have built confidence among people would have been to say that all cruises are banned for the next month. And cruise ships are all going to be in harbor being disinfected. After a month, we'll look into this again. Those who bought cruise tickets, it will be fully refunded by the cruise line. And, we'll see what happens with the cruise lines. If they're going out of business, we'll consider whether it's worthwhile to give them a hand. That should have been the statement that day. Instead, it was, we're just going to let the cruise lines develop their own policy. That doesn't build confidence.
No.
There was a CPAC event also, piggyback on what you were saying. Basically, you have these people going to CPAC. There was a contamination. You're right that we take this kind of ideological stance with the whole coronavirus thing, this notion of individualism and that people are on their own. But I think you're making an extremely good point that there are a lot of things that we do as human beings that we are not individualists. You know what I mean? We're together and we're locked together. One policy or something that I do adversely affects you. Do you think that this will give any kind of impetus for policy change in regards to either Medicare for all or some kind of public policy towards health?
I mean, this is the perfect time, for instance, for Mr. Sanders, Mr. Bernie Sanders, to be out there talking only about healthcare for all, standing only with nurses. I mean, I don't know if you saw that the American Hospital Association released a quite, apocalyptic statement saying 500,000 Americans are going to die once the COVID-19 virus begins its Sherman's march across the United States. I mean, it was a very scary statement that they released. 500,000 will die, it said. There will be more people who will need ICUs than there are beds for. Now, I take that with a grain of salt because the American Hospital Association is a lobby group. And the more, kind of fear that they can create, the more money they can get from the government. Let's accept that. Nonetheless, this is a significant number, 500,000. Let's say it's 250,000. You halve that. Mr. Sanders should be out there every day just talking about this one issue, standing with nurses, standing with doctors. I mean, they know best of all that you shouldn't run healthcare by MBAs. Healthcare should be run by health professionals. Right now in the United States, private healthcare is run by MBAs. What do they know of medicine?
That's Dr. Vijay Prashad. He is the executive director at Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Dr. Prashad, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
With that, we go to another break here live in Washington, D.C. Political Misfits. We're back after this.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, joined with my co-host, Jamarl Thomas. We've been talking a little bit about Joe Biden's electability, the stock market decline, crash, collapse, whatever you want to call it here. Quite alarming for many people around the oil markets as well as the ripple effects from the coronavirus. Jamarl, I told you off the top of your monologue I'd give you my thoughts on Elizabeth Warren. Well, here they are. This weekend, a lot of us sat back and waited to see whether or not Elizabeth Warren would endorse Bernie Sanders, or for that matter, at this point, endorse Joe Biden. The senator from Massachusetts did neither. Instead, she spent her time prepping for the famed U.S. comedy show Saturday Night Live. Yes, Jamarl, she didn't endorse anyone, didn't talk about her policies, but instead went on Saturday Night Live. Here's Elizabeth Warren being interviewed on the skit show about whether or not she'll endorse anyone.
So you're not endorsing anyone yet?
Well, it's tough. Maybe I'll just pull a New York Times and endorse them both.
Well, now that you're done campaigning, do you have any regrets?
You know, not at all. I am so proud of our campaign. We built a wide coalition of teachers, preschool teachers, middle school teachers, and teachers' pets. And not only did I not accept money from billionaires, I got to give one a swirly on live TV.
So no, Jamarl, she did not endorse anyone and instead revealed a deep bitterness towards Bernie Sanders and his supporters. And to make a joke about endorsing both Biden and Sanders is incredibly petty, as both Sanders and Biden have dramatically different policies, which Elizabeth Warren knows. So no endorsement, but hey, she did embarrass Mike Bloomberg on TV and knocked him out of the race. Was that your goal, Elizabeth Warren, simply just to stop Bloomberg? Is that what you're going to hang your hat on and be remembered for, is stopping Bloomberg? What did anybody win in that process? Is that what you want to be remembered for? I thought you were running to ensure every American has health care, that we address climate change, that we create a wealth tax, and we work to bring together the left flank of the party. Wasn't that the plan? So that clearly wasn't the plan or goal at the end of the day. So what do you do instead? Was this your plan all along, to build your national profile, to get on Rachel Maddow playing with your dog, going on Saturday Night Live making jokes? I thought we were being serious about addressing climate change, corporate greed, and guaranteeing health care for all Americans, or were you just joking around? A lot of time has been spent over the last few days dissecting Warren's campaign and figuring out what went wrong. Some say the field operation she built simply collapsed under its own weight. Others blame sexism. Some say her team couldn't figure out what message to hit, and a lack of pollsters made it difficult to gauge what was working and what wasn't. Others have pointed to unforced errors of her famed DNA test or her pullback from Medicare for all. For me, Jamarl, and I've been saying it for years now, the Democratic Party has no desire to work with anyone to their political left. This was true in 2016, and it's true in 2020. The Democratic Party has been laughing in the face of Bernie Sanders for years, and they were surely laughing at Elizabeth Warren behind her back for the last year plus. For Elizabeth Warren to think she was going to somehow be the bridge candidate that would bring together America's left, hungry for economic populism and social justice, with the center-right corporate party desperate to silence the Black Lives Matter movement, the efforts to protect native lands and hold police accountable, was simply unrealistic. Elizabeth Warren wanted to play down the middle when no middle ground was to be had. There's no reforming, tweaking, or editing that's going to fix capitalism and create a brand new Democratic Party that's all of a sudden going to allow for Medicare for all and meaningful policy on climate change. That's not happening, Elizabeth Warren. People knew this. They've been talking about this for decades, and a lot of us have been talking about that and highlighting it since 2016 showed there was no room for Bernie Sanders. There was no room for reform. There's no new rules that you were going to put into place that was going to fundamentally change the Democratic Party. But yet here you come in 2020 and said you were going to the one that was going to do it. Your lane sealed off, Elizabeth Warren. And what do? You blame the far left? You blame those who've been fighting tooth and nail for the policies you've been pushing for the last year on the campaign trail? Medicare for all and your wealth tax is going to be scrapped because of some mean Twitter trolls? By not endorsing Sanders, you are endorsing the Democratic Party, their corporate greed, and their favoritism of big banks over little people, and their complete and utter blindness on social justice. This whole time, you thought you were pulling the party to the left when they were using you to diminish Sanders' movement. Elizabeth Warren, the Democratic Party wasn't laughing with you Saturday night. They were laughing at you. That, Jamarl, is what I think about Elizabeth Warren at this point.
I agree with you. I mean, look, it really does boil down to if you trust Warren and you think she was in this honestly, meaning, she was an earnest actor, and she decided that she was going to run. She was running her own race. It wasn't anybody pushing her or anything like that. She wasn't running as a creature of the party. And she, on one debate stage after the next, I believe in a Green New Deal. Climate change is an existential threat. Well, if it's an existential threat where life itself is at stake, because that's what we're talking about by pertaining to existence, Medicare for all, you have 500,000 people going bankrupt each year because of not having health care, making the choice between meds versus food. Again, this was something that Warren articulated on debate stage after debate stage after debate stage. Criminal justice reform, the expansion of Social Security, slapping Wall Street on the knuckles with a hammer of sorts. I mean, this has been her wheelhouse. We need to put a wealth tax on Wall Street, etc. My basic point is this. With all of the things, the policy proposals that Warren has put forward, her basic argument, her basic tenet, I don't know how anybody can even disagree with me on this, is I am a capitalist version of Bernie Sanders. Basically, I am Bernie Sanders light. I'm not terrifying to the party like Sanders is. By the same token, I also want big structural change. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. If that's where you are, and that's what you want, even if you say not Medicare for all, but a public eye, fair enough. How do you not, after running for a year and a half like this, turn around and back and endorse Sanders? If all of these people are right, that she's an honest actor, then you need to explain this, because this honest actor has been attacking Sanders much more than she ever hit Joe Biden. And even after she got out the race, she continued to hit Sanders. So if indeed this was about policy, you shouldn't have to beg Elizabeth Warren to support or endorse Sanders. You shouldn't have to push her or have her own supporters from these various groups cajoling her and saying, hey, why don't you get in there and back Sanders? You shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah. And that's what blows my mind, is the idea that she's like upset and calling for civility amongst Sanders supporters on Twitter, but doesn't see the fact that the Biden supporters of the world, the Kamala Harris supporters of the world, all these people who don't support Medicare for all, how's that not more offensive to you than anything?
Yes.
Anything somebody could tweet at you.
Snake emojis, man.
Snake emojis is greater than environmental destruction in a party that's taking billions of dollars from millions of dollars from billionaires, whatever. 60-some billionaire donors to Joe Biden. That doesn't upset you? You don't think that's a lack of civility? That great, you knocked out Bloomberg. Did you knock out those other 60 billionaires that have now gone behind Joe Biden?
And by the way, she had a super PAC.
Yeah, I know. It was funny on SNL. She goes, I didn't take money from billionaires. And it's like, or super PACs. Remember that line when you said that, or super PACs for a whole year, and then you took money from super PACs?
She was taking money from super PACs, and she took, even before that, took money from her Senate campaign, which was a dark money wine cave campaign, and put that into her campaign. Meaning, that wasn't even honest. I mean, look, again, I've stuck with the same perspective of Warren the entire time in regards to my model of her operations. I've said on more than once, I don't necessarily, my model is incomplete with Warren. But just based on her actions, I took it as, how can you be a benefit and a friend and an ally of the left if you're hurting the left by your actions?
Yeah.
And in this very specific case, it is understood, overwhelmingly so, that she split that vote on Super Tuesday, and the attacks on Sanders and not endorsing him, I think, is more honest than anything else.
Yeah,
Meaning,
Tim, you're on the line here. Help us find our way here on Elizabeth Warren.
Hello?
Tim, hey, how's it going today?
Hey, how's it going? I've been trying to get people to see that Elizabeth Warren's career has quite literally never been what they've wallpapered it to be. She was chosen by Deval Patrick in 2012 to stop the progressive candidate that was running in that race. That woman's name was Marissa DeFranco. And, this has been an entire farce. When she was at the CFPB, she actually hired bankers and credit card CEOs to run that. So, the fact that people are surprised that she's acting like this is annoying. And the fact that she continues to act like this while claiming to be a progressive is equally as annoying.
Yeah. No, Tim, you make some great points. I talk about that often, the endorsement of Richard Covd over Dennis Kucinich in the gubernatorial race in Ohio in 2018. If it was about policies, you would have endorsed Dennis Kucinich, somebody that has for a long time been right on all of these issues. You endorsed your friend. It was more about political power and relationship building. Jay, you're on the air here. You wanted to talk a little bit about Biden electability.
Yeah, I got 2 points. I wasn't actually going to talk about Biden electability. It was going to be Warren and
Give it to us. That's great.
But yeah, now I don't know. I really think that first of all, with Tulsi, it's like I don't know why Bernie supporters keep treating her the way they are, because I don't know who they think is going to run in 2024.
Who are you talking about, Tulsi?
Anyway, yeah. Who do they think is going to run that they could actually trust to do what Bernie Sanders would do?
Well, who's attacking her? I don't know who's attacking her this time around.
Bernie Sanders supporters have been treating her real bad. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about most people.
Okay.
Most Bernie supporters that I talk to be talking gang of shit about her.
Well, okay. I understand. Let's keep it PG, first point. But on the second point, look, I have seen people take shots at her, less so recently. I mean, because at this point, it's one of those things where she is, it's the two main people in the race. Look, and to be fair, Sanders did come out putting out a tweet saying that Tulsi Gabbard should be allowed on the debate stage. So it's not necessarily all of us.
What was your other point you wanted to make, Jay?
Shit. All right.
All right, we'll
Thanks,
talk to
man.
you next time. Thank you for calling in there. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of where does she go next? I guess it's some administration point that she gets out there stumping and everything. We'll take one more call here. Nick, we just have about a minute left here for the call before the end of the hour. What's on your mind today?
Hi, yeah, my name's Nick. I've called a few times, but anyways, I was just calling to point out that even Trump, I saw on the Hill a video of Trump pointing out how badly, this whole thing with Elizabeth Warren has been even obvious to him. Like, I don't see where this is going to lead for her. You know?
Well, that's the interesting question.
Thank you, Nick, for that.
So that's the interesting question, right? I mean, if you go through this race without backing Sanders, like 2016, I think a lot of people gave her a pass, not Sanders supporters, but a lot of people gave her a pass. 2020 is so overt and it's so extremely clear. The question becomes, what does she think happens? Meaning, does she think she's just going to get a position in the administration of somebody like a Joe Biden, in which case she's not going to need those voters coming around, for the next election? I don't entirely know what she's going to do. I mean, she has gotten a lot of lefties very angry with her because they believed this notion of her being an ally. And all at once they're like, I don't understand.
Were they calm down at all after she went on Rachel Maddow?
No.
Exactly. Like that's the test. Yeah. Why not simply say, look, I can't do Bernie Sanders. This has gone too far. What we do need to do, though, is focus on rebuilding the Democratic Party. We do need to reform it. We do need to talk about it. The best place that we're going to have deep structural change is going to be through one of the two major parties. United States Constitution favors a two-party system. We have a two-party system, and we need to rebuild and reform and change it from within. The first thing I now need to do is take all of those Bernie Sanders supporters that were attacking me and figure out a way how to calm them down and then pull them in towards the Democratic Party so they can go out and vote for Biden. But instead, what she does is goes on Saturday Night Live on Rachel Maddow and basically lays into them and complains about them and says how awful they are and all these different things, and stops talking about the policies and issues that would actually pull them along. And so that you're just as worse as anybody now. That's what's so mind-blowing to me, is that in a moment where you actually can try to calm things down if that's what you're sincerely concerned about, but instead she basically goes to the places to fan the flames more than anywhere else. I'm upset and angry by it, Jamarl, and I know after the turn here, it's not going to get much better as Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and others endorse Joe Biden. More anger on the other side of the hour. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we are not afraid to go against the grain. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with Bob Schlehuber. Let's stay with election news. So just before Super Tuesday, immediately after Joe Biden decisively won South Carolina on the back of an enormous endorsement by kingmaker James Clyburn, we had the grand consolidation of the moderates. Pete and Amy drops out the race and backs Biden. Those endorsements, combined with Warren staying in the race to split the vote, was crucial in clinching the delegates on Super Tuesday, but not just the delegates, because it's not just the delegates that's the most important thing. It is also the narrative going forward. Our next debate is not until, I think, 15th, if I'm not mistaken.
Sunday the 15th.
It's right, the 15th. So basically, you had this kind of lull between South Carolina, Super Tuesday, and now we have the Super Tuesday tomorrow, but nothing in between to give any kind of bump or shake up the race between those 2 points. So it's going to be extremely important going forward that ultimately the frontrunner status that Joe Biden has been bestowed, Sanders has to somehow pull the momentum back from Joe Biden with that particular perspective. Now, there were several high-profile endorsements over the weekend for one Joe Biden, including one that Joe Biden gave away too early, which was Kamala Harris, and another one by Cory Booker. Now, both of these endorsements are rather fascinating because this short-memoried society may have forgotten this, but I haven't. We haven't. We are ever vigilant on this show. In case you've forgotten, let's listen to Kamala Harris hitting Joe Biden. I was that little girl, Joe.
You know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Yeah, little Joe Biden, effectively, I was that little girl.
And that little girl now will endorse that busing man.
Yes.
The states' rights guy. That's who I'm going to endorse. That little girl grew up to endorse that guy.
How strange is that? How strange is that? And we have another one. Cory Booker, who just endorsed Biden, also got his shots on the debate stage, taking issue with Biden's cheerful reference to segregationist James Eastland and effusively kind words for Southern Dixiecrat, South Carolina Dixiecrat Strom Thurmond, who he called one of his best friends. Let's hear this clip of Biden going after, Booker going after Biden.
As a black man in America, I know the deeply harmful and hurtful usage of the word boy and how it was used to dehumanize and degrade. I know that segregationists, like the 2 people you were talking about, through their laws and their language, deeply wounded this nation, and the present day manifestations of their work can still be seen in black and brown communities like the one I go home to. I know that somebody running for president of the United States, somebody running to be the leader of our party, should know that using the word boy in the way he did can cause hurt and pain, and we need a presidential nominee and leader of our party to be sensitive to that.
That Cory Booker also endorsed one Joe Biden. Isn't that fascinating?
Joe Biden did say that Cory Booker owed him an apology, so maybe in many ways this is Cory Booker apologizing to Joe Biden.
By
Cory
giving him
Booker
an endorsement,
yeah,
pretty much.
I'll forgive you for that time you called me out for being friends with segregationists, Cory Booker, if you go ahead and endorse me.
That is utterly hilarious. These endorsements always trip me out because for political bedfellows, they often make amends. Well, Sanders has also been able to get a few big-name endorsements, one of which NAACP Ben Jealous, a former NAACP head of the NAACP, Ben Jealous, and failed gubernatorial run for Maryland. He didn't get the backing that he needed. But also, icon Jesse Jackson. Let's hear this clip of Jesse Jackson bringing in and endorsing one Bernie Sanders.
I stand with Bernie Sanders today because he stood with me. I stand with him because he's never lost his taste for justice for the people. I stand with him because he stands with you.
I stay with him because he stands with you. As Jesse Jackson alluded to, Bernie Sanders backed Jesse Jackson during his run with this notion of a rainbow coalition. And so it's fitting that Jesse Jackson's almost like you can say the circle has completed itself. I look at this and I think to myself, oh, God, Sanders, why didn't you do this early on? We're joined by Brianna Griffin, producer and host of People's Republic Austin, a radio program and podcast. Brianna, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. So is it, I hear this and I'm like, yes, thank you. Why on earth are you just holding this big ticket donation now? Is this too little too late, or is this just in time?
I mean, I hope it's just in time. I guess we'll see. I think it's just the biggest thing is just unfortunate that so much of the, I think, Biden campaign is getting this kind of artificial boost. It's being essentially, it's not having a comeback. It's being resurrected. It was dead, and then it was resurrected in a way. And I don't think, I think the reason Sanders might have held out for something like that is because he wasn't, either he or just I don't think many of us saw just how quickly the kind of different ruling class factions were going to coalesce around Biden. So I think I think it's just it's unfortunate that Biden's been able to sort of build this kind of this artificial momentum to make it seem like his campaign is really surging, when in fact I think in many ways his campaign doing so well in states like Texas has more to do with voter suppression, has more to do with a lot of black people not being able to vote because of massive lines, because of polling location closures in black communities. That's the real reason I think Biden was able to win. So a lot of these southern states was simply the massive amount of voter disenfranchisement here. So yeah, it's unfortunate. I hope that the endorsement from Jackson is able to bring some momentum and show that this is really not over yet. But, it's truly hard to see, I think, at the moment.
That's Brianna Griffith, the producer and host of People's Republic Austin. Yeah, I think a lot of us were surprised how quickly the Democratic establishment closed ranks. Even Bernie Sanders. Let's take a listen here to Bernie Sanders talking about his surprise on that very notion.
Well, one of the things that I was kind of not surprised by is the power of the establishment to force Amy Klobuchar, who had worked so hard, Pete Buttigieg, who, really worked extremely hard as well, out of the race. What was very clear from the media narrative and what the establishment wanted was to make sure that people coalesced around Biden and try to defeat me. So that's not surprising. We are taking on, George, as I think everybody knows, the establishment. We're taking on the corporate establishment. We're taking on the political establishment.
And so, yeah, not surprised. I guess maybe the question then, Brianna, were you surprised how quickly the Democratic candidates there, Amy Klobuchar's of the world, Pete Buttigieg's of the world, were you surprised they didn't stay into Super Tuesday and that they fell in line so quickly? It seemed like Barack Obama finally spoke up like he said he was, got in the ear of at least Pete Buttigieg and said whatever he needed to say to get him to fall in line. I guess I was surprised, like Bernie Sanders there, to correct myself, was not so surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that this was coming. I think a lot of us knew that at some point it was going to coalesce around a single candidate. It would make sense that it would be before Super Tuesday because they had to deny Sanders that momentum. I'm actually just surprised more than anything that it was coalescing around Biden. I thought for certain it would be like Buttigieg or somebody because just Biden is so incoherent. But I guess to me, I was thinking in terms of them trying to make it through to the general when in fact what the real plan here is simply to deny Sanders the primary. They're not fighting Trump. They're fighting Sanders, and Biden, with his sort of attachment to the Obama era nostalgia, I think was best suited for that. So in that way, it makes sense that they would coalesce around Biden. It's unfortunate. It's dirty, but it shows a level, I think, of coordination among the U.S. Ruling class. Among these different kind of factions that might have slightly different interests. The insurance companies have different interests than the charter school companies, which have different interests than like the military industrial complex. Like they all have these slightly different preferences. They all have these slightly different sort of ideological flourishes that they showcase in the early stages of these debates. That's why we had the 15 or so different candidates all kind of throwing out different ideas because they represent these different factions. But this coalescing is really showing that at the end of the day, whatever differences they might have, they're willing to rally around whoever it is to ensure, I think, their complete dominance in this.
Jamarl, I do want to ask you real quick here. I don't know if people have seen this, but Pete Buttigieg is set to guest host for Jimmy Kimmel Live. But to upset you even more, Jamarl, guess who the guest is that he'll get the chance to interview?
Hillary Clinton.
Patrick Stewart.
Really?
Ah, there we go. It all comes back to Star Trek, if you had to ask
wow.
me. We got a few callers on the
Not
line here.
bad.
Charles, you're on the air. Thank you for your frequent calls. They're greatly appreciated here on Political Misfits. What are you thinking about today?
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, how you feeling today?
All right, how y'all doing? I was thinking about Bernie needs to leverage what he has. It's all he has. He needs to leverage the movement and the votes against the Democratic Party. He needs to stop saying, oh, I'll support the nominee, no matter who they is. He needs to be honest and say, look, even if I do support the nominee, whoever they is, my supporters are ideologically like opposite of the other candidates. So even if I personally, individually, Bernie Sanders supported the person, that's not going to work. And he needs to say that. And he needs to use that as a threat. And another thing I wanted to say is we need to get compilations of these videos put together, like what y'all just showed earlier of Kamala Harris saying about the girls' segregation. I need to see a snippet of that put together with that, and then I endorse Joe Biden right afterwards.
Those are really
Charles,
funny.
thank you for the call. I really appreciate it. Jamarl, I'm curious for somebody like yourself. If Bernie Sanders comes out, say Bernie Sanders is not the nominee. Sorry to do this to you, to play this hypothetical. And in August, you're on the fence. What do I do? Do I vote for Joe Biden? Do I support him? Does it matter at that point what Bernie Sanders has to say? Does Bernie Sanders actually sway the people that support Bernie Sanders? Like in 2016, I think he did have a little bit more voice because people were uncertain where they were going. They were uncertain what this movement was. They were uncertain, maybe is the step this way, is the step that? Where do we go? And he eventually said, let's go with Hillary Clinton. Obviously, we need to beat Donald Trump. And I do take Sanders to be a serious, genuine, consistent person that he says, I'll endorse Joe Biden. For me, all along, I've simply said, you go with Sanders because the Democrats in the center they'll vote Democrat no matter what. You need to go with the candidate that's going to pull in new voters or pull in the people that sat out in 2016. You go with Biden, he's simply just going to get people to turn out that we're going to turn out and vote Democrat regardless. He's not going to expand the electorate. I think Bernie Sanders will not have that same power. People aren't going to go to Bernie Sanders. Which way to go? Because Sanders he's done it. He's not running for president again after this. Bernie Sanders is done after this. This is his end of his political movement in many ways. Obviously, he can play kind of a grandfather figure, pull in money, support our revolution and down ballot tickets. But simply, I don't think it's going to matter what he says once the nomination process is over.
Well, you saw that video where he said, we got to go support Hillary Clinton, and they booed him for a minute. I mean, they literally booed him for a minute. No, it's not going to matter one iota what Sanders says. People know, his supporters, that he tends to be authentic. He tends to be somewhat trustworthy, but he also tends to take a lot of hits that other people wouldn't take, and still turns around and supporting the party themselves. He really does believe Trump is a danger. And within those terms, look, there will be a group of people that Sanders can push, but there is a large contingent that would never, under no circumstances, vote for Joe Biden, just like Clinton. And when you look at all of like the stuff that was going on MSNBC, he makes my skin crawl, where it looks like all of these guys were working in tandem as one group to stop him. All of that creates headwinds in regards to getting people to overcome and vote for them. If Sanders couldn't pull out those people in the numbers that he was typically pulling people out, meaning the young vote, Joe Biden certainly is not.
Yeah. Brianna Griffith, what do you think they're from Texas? Will you turn out if Sanders tells you to go vote for Joe Biden come November?
Not under any circumstance. I know some people who will. I know some people who are, fervent Bernie supporters who will, kind of hold their nose. But I also know a lot of people who won't. I mean, really, the coalition around Sanders is not really, I mean, in some ways it's not really about Sanders. It's about this kind of the working class and oppressed people who have been suffering for so long, and Sanders has become this kind of vessel for their frustration, for their rage, for their anger. But they're not gonna necessarily follow Sanders if and when, I mean, it's pretty clear that when he falls in line with the Democratic establishment, when he tells people to go out and vote for Joe Biden, if this is the case, Again, I'm hoping it's not. But if Sanders doesn't get the nomination, we know he's going to endorse Joe Biden. We know that he's going to campaign with Joe Biden. We know that the establishment is still going to blame him when Joe Biden loses. But like really his supporters, the people who support him, the real base behind him, they're definitely, a lot of them are not going to follow him off that cliff, because for them it's really about these kind of ideas he's expressing.
Yeah, let's jump into another call here. Jay, we have you on the line. Thank you so much for calling into Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Jamarl, this is Jay Scott.
What's going on, Jay?
Your biggest antagonist.
What's the topic?
Glad all of my trolling helped make you a better commentator.
Fridays, we need you on Fridays when we come at Jamarl and fight him at 1:30 on Fridays. If you got an idea for this Friday's segment, let us know at the Progressive Soapbox or anywhere else you can find Political Misfits.
And Bob, congratulations as well. You guys really play well off of each other. I just wanted to briefly talk about the Warren endorsement. I think we need to just let that go. I see a lot of people still on social media like pushing for it. At this point, it won't help anything. I don't believe it won't shift the needle. It will be more symbolic than anything else.
I'm waiting for her to pull a Beyonce with Beto O'Rourke at like 6 p.m. tomorrow evening. She'll come out and endorse Sanders when it's like way too late. But like, hey, I was there for the guy. No?
Yeah, at that point, it'll be just symbolic, and it'll just prove what a lot of us knew already, that she wasn't willing to fight like a lot of people were. So, sorry, there's a full of trends, but...
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Jay, for the call. We got another caller on the line here. Ben, thank you for calling in. What's on your mind today?
Hey, guys. How are you doing?
Good.
So I was basically thinking about the compare and contrast the Democratic electorate versus like the Republican electorate. So it seems like, on average, that they're kind of like the inverse of each other, where Republicans know a lot about what goes on within their own party and whether or not they like it, and the differences between candidates. But on the Democratic side, it seems like it's the opposite. Like, they generally don't know, and more to that effect, it's like they know a lot, if you're on the Democratic side, about what the Republicans are doing, but the Republicans don't really seem to know or much care about what the Democrats are doing so much as they just want them out of there. So, and this is just a theory, I don't have data to back it up, but my guess is that in 2016, if all the Republicans had coalesced around one establishment Republican, that Republican would have ultimately lost, even though, they didn't like Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for the call, Ben, Jamarl, or Brianna. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I suppose, maybe. The Republican Party and the Democratic Party are just different in regards to the way they go about choosing their person. The Republicans don't have superdelegates. Worse come to worse.
Yeah. Brianna, what are your thoughts here on... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's also, when you look at the difference between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican establishment and the Democratic establishment, it's the difference between the party who absolutely knows it's reactionary. It's the party who absolutely knows that it is essentially the kind of weapon of the 1%, and it's the versus the party who sort of pretends to be something progressive, something of the people and whatnot. The Democratic Party is really always trying to manage this difference between their donor base, who makes up the establishment, versus their voter base, which is pretty much everybody else. With Republicans, it's very establishment all the way through, but with Democrats, they have to sort of manage that contradiction in, I think, a much more volatile way, and that's what what sort of left in this particular case the rift for someone like Bernie Sanders to kind of get in. But ultimately it's still just as establishment as any other as the other party. And I think really, I don't think Americans in general have a strong understanding of what a political party is. We have such a system where these two things that call themselves political parties, on the one hand, sort of present themselves as something public in nature, where it's like everyone can be involved in. All you have to do is just say that you're a Democrat, say you're a Republican, and you're somehow a part of the party now. But when push comes to shove, when it comes time for them to actually start nominating the people or supporting the people, whether it's a presidential race or whether it's a way down the ballot, they will always, they will always then revert back to the reality that they are a private political party, that they can do what they want any way they want.
Yeah, let's stop there. And
Americans with
no, I just wanted to point out the fact that
only these. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to point out, I was going to talk a little bit about the debate being changed here on March 15th and talking about how it is a private institution and they can make the rules, Democrat or Republican Party make the rules however they want. Finish your thought here, and then we'll pivot back to talk a little bit about the debate rules being changed here in favor of Joe Biden.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to, like, my last sort of thought was just that, Americans don't really have a concept of what it means to form a political party, to be a part of something that truly kind of represents a specific interest or a specific class of people, since these two parties exist kind of as extensions in some ways of the state and as these completely private institutions. But yeah, as far as the debate rule stuff, I mean, we've seen over and over again that the Democratic Party is simply changing the rules as they go along, moving the goalposts as they go along. They did this to keep Bloomberg in the race when he was just funneling money into the establishment. And now they're, for this March 15th debate coming up, it seems like they're trying to make it more of a town hall style debate, because they believe that this will make Biden look, I think, less
weak.
Less weak than he actually.
Yeah, I mean, honestly. I mean, basically, just to give the audience a heads up on this. So there's been a lot of talk recently about Joe Biden's cognitive function or his cognitive decline. And this is being put forth in the context of the March 15 debate. And so coming up tomorrow, you're going to have Michigan, Washington State, Missouri, Mississippi, Idaho, and North Dakota. Those are going to be the states. Now, we haven't had a debate ever since there's been this kind of consolidation of the moderates. And so the Sanders camp wants Joe Biden to be standing up for those 2 hours, effectively answering questions. Now, the catch here is the Democratic Party is kind of changing this, and what they've done was they've allowed him to sit down, and in allowing him to sit down and answer questions, they've also opened it up from the audience in this kind of town hall format. Now, this seems small, but there's a huge reason or renewed focus on Joe Biden's noticeable cognitive decline, and meaning that from Sanders' camp, we want this guy talking as much as this guy could possibly talk. Now, senior advisor Jeff Weezer made the point, Joe Biden does not want to go head-to-head with Bernie Sanders, stand there for 2 hours, and go back and forth with Sanders. He wants it broken up with audience questions because he knows in that environment he won't do all that. Well, Fiz Shakir, Sanders' campaign manager, also retweeted a report or remark that kind of made the point that Biden only spoke for 7 minutes at his rally, whereas Sanders is doing rallies in 2 different states where he's going for like 30, 40 minutes. And let's hear a clip. This is Joe Biden, and this is the thing that they're concerned about in regards to Joe Biden being on the campaign stage. Listen to this medley of Joe Biden in this last speech in Missouri.
I have been national firefighters. What I even, I ponder though is the incredible enthusiasm and excitement this campaign has generated, folks. A lifelong Democrat, a proud Democrat, and a Biden-Obama Democrat. We're going to bring together Americans of every race, ethnicity, gender, economic station, Democrats. If you think big enough and bold enough to build the future of this nation, that one that deserves. We can do this by building on Obamacare and standing up and beating the NRA and gun manufacturers straight up, increasing exponentially the prospects of their success.
Exponentially. I mean,
that's not the and then the whole this guy's got a stutter.
He's
slurring his words. With stutters. That's not a stutter problem. Like
That's not a
misremembering
stutter.
facts and like forgetting the histories of civil rights arrests. That's not a stutter issue.
Yeah, that's
Stop
either
telling me you're beating up on Biden. The guy has a stutter. Stop with that. That's not what's happening.
No, that's not a stutter. He look, either he lied flagrantly about going to South Africa, either he lied
Getting
about
arrested in South
yeah,
Africa.
arrested
Yeah,
in South Africa, or he was going senile. Now, you need to tell me which one, because both of those things look bad to me. And in that speech in Missouri, that was 7 minutes. He was slurring his words. He was forgetting his words. He was adding words that weren't supposed to be together. I mean, this is something that they are absolutely concerned about, but it is also something that Sanders wants to take advantage of, meaning they want him on that stage talking the entire time. Brianna, we're joined with Brianna Griffin, producer and host. Griffith, I'm sorry, producer and host of the People's Republic of Austin, a radio program and podcast. Brianna, are they on to something here? If you can get Joe Biden, this aged septuagenarian, on that stage for multiple hours, that eventually the sundowning will start to show and they think they can take advantage of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, with the number of gaffes in those like 7 minutes, I mean, there's no way he can get up there for 2 hours and kind of speak coherently for 2 hours. And it's not a stutter. I mean, as you just heard, like I have a stutter whenever I'm on the air. It's something that happens usually when like 2 or 3 thoughts are trying to go in at once. It's like too much trying to fit into a single mental channel. With Joe Biden, it's clear that like it's clear that he's, you know, got nothing basically going into the mental channel, that there are like no kind of thoughts going into it. And it's like he's really struggling to recall basic facts and whatnot. And if you go back just a couple years with Joe Biden, if you just go back to sort of his speeches just a few years back, you find a much more coherent person who's not stuttering, who's not forgetting words, who's, you know, really truly sharp. I mean, as much as his policies, as much as his rhetoric is despicable, he was nonetheless very kind of mentally sharp just a couple years back.
Yeah.
You can hear it now that he's not. And if he can't withstand a 2-hour debate with Sanders, there's no way Trump is gonna mop the floor with him in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Breaking news here that the Biden camp is trying to see if the debate can be 4.5 minutes long. Obviously not true, but that's what they're hoping for. We have another caller on the line here. Brian, thank you for calling in. You had some comments around Bernie Sanders.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Hey.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment briefly, right? Look, man, when it's all said and done, it's all Bernie's fault. You know what I mean? I love Bernie. I'm still going to support him financially. I'm going to vote for him. But look, you got to be real. It's all his fault. He let this guy get by. He should have like chopped his head off. Not
metaphorically speaking, sure.
He had the chance. I mean, and you know, the Democratic Party don't care. They don't care if Biden is suffering from dementia. Remember, they don't care about any of that.
Yeah.
They want Bernie, anything but Bernie. They'll deal with Trump to keep Bernie from winning the presidency.
Yeah, thank you for the call, Brian. Greatly appreciated. Let's go to Anthony, who is in Michigan, or at least a Michigan voter. Anthony, how's it looking there for Sanders and Biden going into the vote in Michigan tomorrow?
Mixed bag for sure.
Okay.
What's up, guys?
Hey, how's it happen? What's going on?
Talk to you guys. What's up, Jamarl?
What's going on, man? Doing all right?
Talk to you guys. Yeah, love the show, guys. Yeah, I've been doing some canvassing out of Michigan, and so I had a chance to talk to some people, and it's a mixed bag. It's just a little bit of a mixed bag. I mean, it's kind of what the polls, kind of what it reflects as far as like the electorate in general, like the opinions of white moderates are the opinions of white moderates, and the opinions of, you know, liberals are the opinions of liberals, and everything, the ones you'd expect and what we're seeing from the polls and stuff.
Anthony, I'm curious, what the things like trade deals, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership or NAFTA, for example, are those big ticket items in your neck of the woods, meaning in Michigan and in those areas?
It's interesting, you know. I'm sure you guys know all about the there's a scandal right now with the UAW, the head of it. He's kind of going down for corruption,
right?
And there was also been those protests and everything, the struggles they were having with, you know, getting their benefits and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure, you know, I'm certain that is crucial to those to that electorate. I just haven't had much personal experience with them, so I can't personally speak to, you know, to their opinions. But I'm certain it's something they're worried about. And, you know, just my experience, I'm as a black person, you know, with my my older family members and everything, hearing from them, I'm seeing a particular Biden, I guess, I don't know, ignorance or cognitive dissonance, you know, while speaking to them about his racist issues. yet still seeing them, kind of cover for the guy more.
Let me ask you one more question. When you're talking to your relatives, have you ever made the point to them that said Joe Biden was lying about being part of the civil rights movement? And what was their response when you made that point to them? I'm just curious.
Literally, MSNBC. See, it's literally like if they were to be just expose themselves to, I guess you could call it the dirtbag left or leftist YouTube, then you wouldn't hear these talking points being blabbed out of their mouth. It's Ashley Rosen or whatever the woman's name was, or I think Hillary.
I know what you're talking about, but Nina
Hillary
Turner.
Rosen.
Yeah. Hillary Rosen.
It's like, oh, he did that, but he changed his opinion now, so it's okay. And it's like, no, it's not. It's the issue. I mean, when Kamala Harris, talked about it, it's like you guys played the clips, how you guys played the clips earlier. It's kind of confusing to see them all of a sudden shift their opinion so much.
Yeah. Anthony, thank you so much for the call. It's greatly appreciated. And yeah, wild that the federal government could take over the United Auto Workers Union. The president, Gary Jones, has already stepped down as the investigation into corruption and malfeasance goes on. Let's take a quick break before we come back more with our weekly Miss the Press segment. Everybody's favorite, Hillary Clinton, is featured. Stay tuned. We'll be back after this break here in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
Tune in to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for the latest news, commentary, and political analysis. What's really behind the political and social crisis gripping the United States and the world? If you're tired of a superficial and shallow reporting for the mainstream media, here's your alternative. Forget the spoon-fed sound bites from pundits who know so little about so much. We deal with real issues. War in the Middle East, the military-industrial complex, U.S.-Russian relations, the rise of China, austerity, mass migration, global warming, and social justice movements in the United States and around the world, and much more. We bring you independent experts, analysts, and activists. Learn what really makes the decision makers take from the boardroom of Wall Street to the West Wing of the White House. Here is where the people fighting for chance speak and are heard loud and clear. 5 days a week on Radio Sputnik and SputnikNews.com.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. Time for our weekly Miss the Press segment, where I get to lean in, lean against, criticize, critique, yell at the Sunday talking heads. We continue to be joined by Brianna Griffith, producer and host of People's Republic Austin, as well as my good friend and co-host here, Jamarl Thomas. Brianna, let's start with the red-headed stepchild of Sunday morning talk shows, Fareed Zakaria's GPS, the Global Public Square. Sticking with the theme of endorsements, Fareed asked no other than Hillary Clinton on what she thought about the state of the Democratic presidential primary and whether or not she'll endorse either Sanders or Biden. And here's the most Hillary Clinton responses that she could offer.
If Bernie Sanders is the Democratic nominee, will you campaign for him?
I will support the nominee of the Democratic Party.
Or will you campaign for him?
I don't know if he would ask me to campaign for him, Fareed, because I have no idea what he is thinking about for a general election campaign. As I've said many times, I do not think he's our strongest nominee against Donald Trump.
Is that an endorsement of Joe Biden?
I'm not endorsing.
There's nobody left.
Well, I guess that's true. There isn't anybody left.
I don't think there's enough time that we can bleep out the amount of curse words I want to string together right now.
Pretty much.
What?
She
Poor
lost.
little old me. I don't know if he'll call me. Who? Would he call me? Would he want me? Little old Hillary Clinton out there? Get out of here! What are you saying? Just endorse Joe Biden and get it out of the way.
Yeah, I
This
don't
whole
even
I'm
know
not
why
going to
she's
endorse
pretending.
anyone. But he's awful. I hate him.
It's like being cagey. Like
no one likes him.
It's like, no, secretly I'd back Sanders. It's like nobody believes that.
No.
Nobody believes that. And there's this other weird thing where she's like being cagey about this. He marched for her in states that she didn't even go to.
And to think that he's not going to want you out there stumping for him or endorsing him if he's the nominee. Get out of here. Oh, he's going to turn his back on Hillary Clinton, who won the popular vote, one of the most popular presidential nominees of all time. He's not going to ask for you to support like he supported you. Of
course he's going to
of course
want your
he will.
support. Yeah.
He's not going to throw his back against you guys. That's what he really wants to do. He's going to get the nomination and then say, all you establishment Democrats who I need to win, I don't care about you or Hillary Clinton. Brianna, it just felt so Hillary Clinton-esque. And it was a serious conversation. For Fareed's okay. He goes, well, I guess you haven't endorsed yet. All right.
I mean, there's also the possibility that maybe Bernie Sanders wouldn't actually benefit from a Clinton endorsement. I mean, thinking of the fact that Clinton herself couldn't even show up to a lot of those Midwestern states, because whenever she would show up to a town, whenever she would show up to actually, like, be at a rally or whatnot, like her poll numbers would start to go down in those states. So yeah, sure, she's probably. I'm not saying Bernie Sanders wouldn't want her endorsement, but yeah, you're absolutely right. She said absolutely nothing. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. I'm just so tired of hearing about Hillary Clinton. I'm tired of her just popping up and saying absolutely nothing at all, and then just disappearing into the shadows again. Like everything she really says is entirely about her anyway. It's not even about policies. It's not even about different ideas or ideologies. It's just entirely about her and her campaign. And as much as she says she's tired of people, for instance, talking about her emails or whatnot, everything she manages to say is always somehow about her emails and about, more or less how people have slighted her. And that she, it's still essentially just replaying 2016 over and over and over again, where it feels like she feels like she was owed the presidency, not only from the Democratic primary, but from the general as well. And yeah, it's absolutely petty.
Hillary Clinton put out a tweet the other day saying that Joe Biden is bringing together her coalition. It's like, yeah, that's kind of the problem. That is the concern, right? I mean, 3 million more votes, all of which took place in California. And she doesn't want to own up to the fact that she lost. I mean, and if you look back, it's not even like this is an outlier. I mean, Al Gore lost. John Kerry lost. Hillary Clinton lost. All of these people were, for all intents and purposes, the exact same person. Obama was able to get through because Obama ran on hope and change, as opposed to running on this notion of radical incrementalism. And they never get it. Meaning there's always this kind of weird dichotomy of reality of all of these moderates losing versus the reality where they act as if, well, we're the person who obviously would be the normal standard bearer. It's so strange. She has to know that she's not liked, right? I mean, this is not like there's no way she's that mental where she believes that she is the still stalwart of the party and whatnot. And I got to be honest, to piggyback on something you said, I don't think her endorsement would help Sanders.
I completely
in those
disagree.
Areas. Go for
Completely disagree, because there's going to be those people that are going to say, I'm going to stay at home. I don't like Bernie Sanders. I'm going to pay back for what he did to Hillary Clinton.
Like
Let's
backing
get
up
him.
credibility.
And it gives them credibility,
Yeah.
and it will simply take those establishment Democrats or center-right Democrats. And I think we should
that's
also
fair.
stick here on political misfits. Stop calling them moderates. They're conservative Democrats. They're conservatives.
Yeah.
There's the center-left, which is Bernie Sanders, and stop thinking he's some radical because he's
just an FDR Democrat.
He's like
I
a
mean,
centrist in
he's a
many ways,
centrist.
or a center-left person, but somehow he gets painted as a radical, and these are just the moderates, because it sounds like moderation's good, right? We should drink in moderation, do drugs in moderation.
it's
Like
political
everything is in
casting, right.
moderation. These people are conservatives. They're neoliberals that want to privatize as much of the government as they can. They think about GDP growth over they think about human growth. That's what they are. And those people don't want to vote for Bernie Sanders. It's going to dramatically change their orientation with the political system if Bernie Sanders is somehow leading the Democratic Party or he became president. Hillary Clinton is sat on the board of and has donors from the vast majority of the 100 largest corporations in America. She gains him credibility in those spaces.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she could actually come out and endorse the guy. I think it would go against everything she believes in,
I'd be
and she
shocked.
doesn't want to see it. And that's what's so shocking to it, again, where she's going to say, oh, I don't know if we need to play this hypothetical because maybe you are right, Brianna, at the end of the day, like it doesn't matter what Hillary, like it's so beyond her at this point. But I think she does still have quite a bit of power, and people look to her as much as so many people greatly hate her. And that's what Joe Biden is ultimately leaning on, is that it's not a Democratic problem right now. The Democratic Party wasn't able to secure an electoral victory. It was Hillary Clinton who wasn't. That's why people just hated her, and they were just so sick of her that anybody but Hillary Clinton could beat Donald Trump.
Brianna?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of thoughts to kind of follow up there. I definitely want to especially expound upon that idea of like the moderates, right? You use the term neoliberalism, but I don't think a lot of people realize what neoliberal means as far as that goes. Like neoliberalism comes out of like the Chicago School of Economics that was, essentially the kind of economic policy, the shock doctrine that took place in, for instance, Pinochet era Chile. It It is the economic model of the far, far right across the world that is massively eroding all of the workers' gains of the 20th century. So when we're talking about the neoliberals, when we're talking about the moderates, those are the people we're talking about. And I think more and more people are absolutely seeing just how despicable these economic policies are. I think really Bernie Sanders, if there is a moderate in this race, if there's a moderate in the mainstream political landscape right now, it would be Bernie Sanders. And to the left of Bernie Sanders would be people like me, and to the right of Bernie Sanders would be, I think, everybody in the kind of political sphere, all the presidential candidates, all of Congress, whatnot, are actually to the pretty far right. It's Bernie Sanders, I think, who is kind of the political moderate here. And yeah, with someone like Clinton, she absolutely, like, clearly despises Sanders, despises everything he kind of stands for. I would be very, very surprised if she actually threw in an endorsement for Sanders.
The other big conversation on the Sunday talk shows here, as we continue with our weekly Monday segment, Miss the Press on Political Misfits, was the coronavirus, Jamarl. So let's start with the show that makes me the sickest of all the Sunday morning shows, Meet the Press. Bernie Sanders was on Meet the Press along with every other Sunday talk show here doing the rounds, and each and every one talked about the coronavirus. So it seems pretty straightforward to then ask Bernie Sanders, how would you handle the health crisis? How do you contrast yourself with Donald Trump's approach? How will you respond to the growing calls on how to limit the outbreak, such as decreasing public gatherings? Yet Chuck Todd instead takes the, let's be really aggressive and paint it as if Bernie Sanders wants to give everyone the coronavirus. Let's listen to these questions and framings here from Chuck Todd. Here's the first part.
I just have spoke with Dr. Anthony Fauci. I know you know him well, know his reputation well, and he said the following this morning. He doesn't think people over a certain age should be traveling right now, particularly not going on cruises. If you have an underlying condition, that there really does need to be some sort of self-quarantining of sorts, or being careful going into large groups. Let me ask you this. Has your campaign made a decision on whether to hold large rallies right now?
Basically, the doctor said if you go to a large rally, you're going to die. Sanders, you're going to have large rallies. And by the way, don't you have underlying health issues and heart attack prone concerns that you might have that you want to stay out of? It's like, the doctor said this. Are you going to defy the doctor? And then he doubles down. So Sanders says, no, of course not. We're talking to health experts around the country. Of course, we're being mindful. The NBA is dealing with this. Everybody is dealing with this. If they have crowds, it's not just us. Why are you pointing the finger at me like I'm the only one doing large gatherings who hasn't canceled all of my events? So then, obviously, Chuck Todd doubles down on this line of questioning. Here's the second part question from Chuck Todd.
I was just going to say, who makes that call for you? I mean, if the state of, if a public health official in Michigan says, you know what, I know you have a big rally scheduled here, wherever it is. If they say, don't do it, you're not going to do it?
Yeah, Chuck Todd, the guy that's concerned with getting every American health care in the country is going to defy doctors and state officials' orders telling them to cancel large gatherings. Are you going to do it, Bernie? Are you going to defy the healthcare experts in the state of Michigan? Bernie, just cancel all your events now. Cancel your presidential run. Can you just do that, Bernie? Bernie, why don't you do that? And that's who the guy he's pressing on the healthcare issue is, the guy that's trying to get healthcare for all, while at the same time, let me just play one last clip from our Miss the Press segments here. This one is from George Stephanopoulos interviewing Dr. Ben Carson on This Week on ABC. So while we're pushing the guy to the wall who wants healthcare for all, this is who the Trump administration puts out there talking about the coronavirus is Dr. Ben Carson, the Secretary of the Housing and Urban Development. Let's play this exchange between the two.
As you know, the Grand Princess is docking, the cruise ship is docking in Oakland tomorrow. What plan is in place to deal with the 3,500 people on board?
The cruise ship personnel, and as you know, the Vice President met with the CEOs of the major cruise ship companies yesterday. And they are coming up with a plan within 72 hours of that meeting.
The ship's docking tomorrow.
The plan will be in place by that time, but I don't want to preview the plan right now.
Is he awake?
Shouldn't you be able to do that?
I think it needs to all come from a solitary source. We shouldn't have 16 people saying what the plan is.
Okay,
particularly when it hasn't been fully formulated.
Okay, well, you're the president's representative this morning, but let me move.
You don't have the plan. Give
horrible.
us 72 hours. Well, you have 8. Well, yeah, we'll get it by then. And then he just basically at the end wakes up from his nap and says, oh, no, the plan hasn't been formed yet.
Low energy is an understatement.
And then George Stephanopoulos is like, oh, all right. And it's like, wait, how did Chuck Todd do a tougher presser on Bernie Sanders than they did on Dr. Ben Carson, the guy that was rolled out? I like, too, that he was like, well, we can't have 16 of us out here saying it. And, like, Trump pushed Carson forward. Was like, you're the one. Brianna, I don't know. Any thoughts on our slow, comical demise as a nation?
I mean, you know, I trust Ben Carson's plan to store a bunch of grain in pyramids, as he was saying in 2015 or so. Oh man, it's really like this whole thing, the coronavirus thing, is just really revealing how absolutely unprepared the entire United States is for all of the corporate media's obsession with how China handled it, which was somehow both too much and too little at the same time. You saw absolutely contradictory reports where essentially China couldn't, according to the corporate media, do anything right. Now all of a sudden it's revealed that actually China had a pretty solid plan. They were able to build hospitals in a matter of a week, just, you know, really throwing up like an entire sort of nationwide plan to deal with this. And the U.S. is totally, completely unprepared. And it's not just, you know, it's the Trump administration is revealing it the most, but it is absolutely a systemic thing going back essentially to the neoliberalism, the privatization that we were talking about earlier, that's left, you know, basically no sort of public infrastructure to deal with a massive, what could be a massive epidemic like this. Who knows what happens with it? But it's clear that the U.S. is unprepared.
So we have 2 comments. Xavier Foster, how many Chinese whistleblowers have you both watched? Why is Chinese government disappearing them? How much do you actually know now? Haven't heard about that one. Xavier Foster, Warren's goal isn't to win, it was to stop Sanders. That part I do agree with. You know, one of the things, Brianna, that this has kind of concerned me about, oftentimes you would think that their basic machinery of government, whether or not the president is entirely engaged or not. Meaning that if you have an outbreak, I don't necessarily need Trump to be the one who's calling the shots on the outbreak. There should be certain kind of, yes, if there's something extreme that needs to be done, fair enough. But ultimately, the machinery of the United States, you would hope, would just work. Well, that's not necessarily what's happening, though. I mean, you have, 500 people being tested a day in the U.S., where there was like 10,000 people a day in South Korea. Like, and then you have certain criteria, apparently, that you have to meet before you could ever even get tested, because we don't have the necessary equipment for the testing. And even like what we're using to treat it doesn't seem to be necessarily something that we're all that much on the board with. I don't know how this is going to look in the United States, but it seems that our own cultural biases, this notion of individualism and capitalism and markets and everything else, especially in healthcare, is to our detriment for this, and seems like you said, I think you said, a perfect storm in regards to how we are going to get hit with this particular illness.
And there's also an additional point where it's like a lot of basic public policy things that would have really helped prevent the spread of disease are being shot down. There was a huge statewide campaign throughout Texas to try and implement a paid sick leave for especially like low-income workers, for people in the service industry. That was shot down entirely at the state level, to the point where like even today people have no paid sick leave in the state in most cities, so that people in the service industry have to basically show up and serve however many thousands of people a day, even if they're sick, because they have no sort of workers' protection whatsoever. I know that's going on all across the country. I've seen the kind of push from the quote-unquote small business community, which is often the large business community, really, to shut down any sort of protections that would be in the interest not only of individual workers, but of just public health in general. And so it really is these kind of policies and these kind of essentially repressive measures against even the most basic progressive protections that's going to really cause this to be a much more devastating outbreak than it would have to be.
Yeah, my thoughts go out to the tip workers out there in the world who are going to be devastated by this, and those, like you mentioned, that can't take vacation. I even think about the tip minimum wage effort here in Washington, D.C. to have a minimum wage for tip workers as opposed to having to work into it, the tips. And so many people aggressively fought against it. Oh, I get so many tips, it's going to come off of my overall pay if we don't have tips and stuff. And then here you are saying you're going to have empty restaurants. This is exactly what we're taking. These big corporations that can run huge restaurants and that can basically they'll get through this economic downturn.
Yeah.
Millionaires will be fine.
Employees.
The CEOs will be fine. But it's the employees at the end of the line, and yet people are so short-sighted over profit that they're willing to look past long-term human needs and the cost of viruses like this. This is what capitalism gets you. How do you fix capitalism, Elizabeth Warren, to better protect people from viruses? There's no such thing. It's a model that is influenced by making money. There's no other way to fix that. And that's what another reason we talk about, other reasons why Elizabeth Warren wasn't able to stay in the race. This whole compassionate capitalism is not a thing. And we're seeing it in play right now when it was a moment for capitalism to be compassionate, as Brianna is saying. People turned their backs on it and said, no, that's going to hurt the bottom dollar. Let the people die. That was Brianna Griffith, producer and host of People's Republic Austin. Brianna, thank you so much for joining us. Tell people how they can find your podcast and your radio program online.
Yeah, so you can find People's Republic basically wherever podcasts are potted, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, just by typing in People's Republic. We are also available on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX.
Well, Jamarl, we gave him a few days, but we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to bury once and for all Mike Bloomberg. We're back after this Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We'll see you after the break. So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber, here joined with Jamarl Thomas. Well, we talked a little bit earlier about what led to the downfall of Elizabeth Warren's campaign, but we also have confirmation of what we all had knew about Michael Bloomberg's blink and you'll miss it run for president. It was a grift. No, seriously, that's the title of a piece in The Nation about Bloomberg's campaign. It's called "This Was a Grift." Here's a sample from The Nation. Quote, "Not a single Bloomberg staffer that I spoke to was surprised by the campaign's implosion. Speaking on the condition of anonymity for fear of professional reprisal and because of the campaign's non-disclosure agreement, campaign employees cited that bruising debate as well as a general lack of enthusiasm for Bloomberg among the staff as the main factors ending his presidential run. There are more great quotes out there if you need them. This one in the National Review. Ever since the first debate, all of us faced a ton of hostility, a field organizer said. I once had a woman chase me back to my car, demanding that I say, you can't buy the presidency. These staffers were getting the best salaries plus free housing, free food, new iPhones, and they still didn't want Bloomberg to win. Somebody else said, I quote here, I would actively canvass for Bernie when I was supposed to be canvassing for Mike. I know of at least one team of volunteers that was entirely fabricated by the organizers who had to hit their goals. It was easy enough to fudge the data to make it look like real people put in real volunteer work, when in reality, Mike was getting nothing out of it.
Wow.
And I've seen it before with campaigns, you know, I mean, people take here's 100 flyers, go pass out the 100 flyers. They say, sure, right on it. And they walk over to a dumpster, throw away the 100 flyers and say, yeah, hand it all 100 out. And that's why you can't just buy campaigns to some degree or another. You can buy name recognition. Yeah. You can build some energy, obviously, as Bloomberg did. But when you're just a horrible human with this kind of background, this is what you get for all of those dollars.
$600 million. $600 million. Over $500 million was spent just in the primary process for Bloomberg to get humiliated on 2 debate stages and for him to have one election showing where, for the most part, was his last election showing.
And you know what's great about it, just to jump in, what's so great about it is I know we don't have Medicare for all. I know we don't have an answer to the climate crisis.
Yeah.
I know we're going to still have homeless people tomorrow, but at least Michael
This didn't
Bloomberg's
work.
no longer in the race.
Yeah, this didn't
What
work.
are you talking about, Elizabeth Warren? That's what you're saying, Elizabeth Warren. As long as Mike Bloomberg's not in the race, his grifter's no longer there, that's the win for you. Like, that's what's so ridiculous.
Oh,
Jamarl.
right.
Because I'm being, like, sarcastic. It's like, we don't have any of this stuff, but, like, thank God Bloomberg's not in. This guy, this grifter, like, we stopped him. Oh, everything's fine in America again.
Not so much.
Not
so much. I mean, it's so wild, though. I mean, he spent this, for somebody to spend this much money, it makes me feel good to some degree because they're like, yeah, I needed the paycheck, but I wasn't going to be out here shucking and jiving for Bloomberg. And so, you know, the question was always with Bloomberg in the race is whether there was a price point whereby money does buy the votes. Meaning, you know, oftentimes there's this argument of dollars versus pitchforks, but we've never seen this level tested to the point where you have $600 million versus somebody who a few $1 million in pitchforks. Well, to some degree, it's nice that the public looks at this and thought, what I did, he's trying to buy the election.
Yeah.
And they didn't give him the benefit of the
Well,
doubt.
just remember, plenty of people are full Mike Bloomberg that weren't out there stomping for Sanders. I'm curious what you think people will respond to the London Breeds of the world, the mayor of San Francisco, or the mayor of this town here, Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser.
Yeah.
I know for somebody that's critical of Muriel Bowser, I'm definitely going to remind her as much as I possibly can that she went out and endorsed Mike Bloomberg.
That's right.
And it seems like, what were these people thinking going out there on a limb for this guy, endorsing him on I know whatever the money's attached to it.
Yeah.
But is that not a death knell in a lot of these people's political careers because they didn't endorse Biden? They said, no, I'm going to step out. Or does it simply not matter? It's the Biden, Bloomberg, whatever. We need not Sanders. We're all on the same team now. You can come on over to Biden.
I think for them, it's Biden and Bloomberg. I mean, like I said, when Bloomberg first got in the race, Bloomberg didn't run the first 4 races because he was giving Biden his chance to show if you can, you know, consolidate the support and those type of things. I don't know if Bloomberg necessarily wanted to be the guy. I just think he didn't want it to be Sanders. And so from their standpoint, I don't know if they look at it and say, oh, he didn't endorse Biden, so, you know what I mean? I think they might just be considered the same factor of the same party. And for them, it's cash. Bloomberg. Like, if your name is Stacey Abrams and Bloomberg wrote you a check for $5 million, well, you're going to feel kind feelings towards Bloomberg for writing you that check for that much money. And so you might have all sorts of organizations. I mean, this was the article, was it Washington Post, where they were talking about the difficulty of having somebody like Bloomberg in the race who have all of these endorsements, all of these things that were bought by himself, giving billions of dollars to the Democratic Party, buying these people up and down the United States, creating a party in his own image. Look, all of that stuff, him by himself can do that. And if you know that 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash, what's the most important thing? Get the most cash.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, now is Bloomberg basically saying, I'm going to hand over my whole operations to Biden. I'm curious if that kind of comes back and will hurt Biden. I mean, again, it's like, what is your argument against Donald Trump? That Donald Trump's for corporate tax breaks for the wealthiest amongst us when you have Bloomberg in your corner? And Biden's going to say, yeah, I'm for that, too.
But his argument is not on policy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think back when Biden first got into the race. Do you remember him arguing about policy? Nope, he didn't. I'm Joe Biden. I'm the guy that could beat Trump like a
What
drum.
are the policies that people are supporting? If you're a Biden supporter, you're not listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. I get that. But that's a great point. Ask you next time you run into a Biden supporter, say, what are the 2 policies that you're really excited for?
Yeah.
Obamacare, that thing has been gutted and destroyed by the courts. You're not going to walk that one back.
Yeah. And in their mind, I think he takes us back to when politics made us feel good about ourselves. You know, kind of like recycling. It's like, oh, I threw this can into the recycling bin. I feel so great now that this is taking place. I think that's where it starts and ends. And look, you know for yourself when you were in Iowa that there were one of the hardest things in the world, especially for somebody of my political designation, is to get people to realize that your society has no point. There's no purpose behind it. You choose what you want your society to do, what you want your society to accommodate. And if we, as human beings, say, look, we're not in this together individually, we're not in this as singular beings operating in the space where I do things and it doesn't affect you. Well, if we make the argument that everybody getting an education is beneficial to the whole.
Yeah.
Everybody having health care is beneficial to the whole. And if you don't believe that last part, look at the coronavirus outbreak thing where you have every incentive in the world for certain people to have to go to work in order to make their ends meet. It's hard to get people to realize that, though. I
Yeah.
mean, in their heads, they've been propagandized to for the past 50 years. It is very difficult to get them to realize we can have nice things.
Yeah.
And that seems to be one
And
of
what's the point
starting
of
points.
society, like you said? If we can't have housing, food, education, the well-being for the masses collectively, what are we doing
What's the
here?
point? Yeah.
Well, you've been listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. A big thank you to Dr. Vijay Prashad and Brianna Griffith for joining us. Big thank you to Ryan and Dimitri and Michelle in the booth. We're going to be back with another show with you tomorrow. Thank you again for listening. Now get back to organizing.